Our media madness story. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's latest demands call for taxpayer funds to de-radicalize white supremacists. And by white supremacists, of course, she means Republicans, Trump supporters, and basically anyone else she disagrees with. After all, she said just a week prior that the entire Republican Party was guilty of white supremacy. Take a look.
We had programs, federal programs, that went towards funding organizations like these that de-radicalized people. And President Trump pulled the plug on federal funding for some of these programs. And so one thing that we know is that we have to get that funding right back up, and we probably need to double, triple, quadruple, or increase funding for these de-radicalization programs en masse.
Then in a virtual town hall on Friday night, AOC responded to a question asking how Americans should respond to those who believe in conspiracy theories, but do not participate in violence. She answered the question by blaming recent violence, such as the Capitol riots, on white supremacy yet again. AOC suggested tax-funded de-radicalization programs with up to quadruple the funding in comparison to current programs. With me now to discuss is an editor for the Daily Wire and host of the Ian Haworth Show. Welcome back, Ian.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure being on your show.
Great. So a few years ago, we might have been able to laugh off this suggestion as extreme of what AOC is proposing. But with the new censorship targeting that we've seen, and it's been ramping up, is there really a reason now to be concerned, especially since this coming Wednesday, they'll have the White House, they'll have the House, and they'll have practically the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things to be concerned about. I think we could be concerned politically because AOC's view that all Republicans are synonymous with white supremacists is not like her. She's not the outlier here. This is the general view that Republicanism, conservatism is synonymous with white supremacy. And let's also think about this in a cultural stance. We have a lot of people who are growing to believe this point, and it's only going to further fracture the American society in two. I mean, Joe Biden talked on and on about unity. I believe the last time I was on your show, we were talking about his call for unity, and then he immediately compared Trump to Goebbels. And so this is something I'm pretty worried about. And I think the next couple of years are going to be pretty dangerous for conservatives in a lot of ways.
And of course, this goes hand in hand with censorship, because if you can just write off all of your opponents as just white supremacists and evil, and you can write them off completely, then you never have to engage with their ideas. So in a sense, that's censorship as well.
Absolutely. I mean, they've got multi-pronged censorship plays going. We saw it happening with New York Post, for example, when they shut down a piece that turned out to be true that could have really quite seriously affected Joe Biden's campaign. And so we've got multiple levels of censorship. I was just reading a news post just before coming on where people are calling for Verizon, AT&T to drop One American News, Newsmax. They are looking really to shut down conservative thought in all areas of American life. And so people really need to wake up and notice that it's happening on every level and know when to push back, because it's important that we do.
And to that point as well, I saw the Associated Press today was running an article saying that podcasts need to be shut down if they're deemed to be far right and all sorts of heinous terms that they use to demonize us, really. And of course, you're a podcast host yourself, so they're taking us all on. And AOC as well, she's in Congress currently, and she's calling to, quote, rein in the media. So not only is it big tech doing and big business, but they want big government to clamp down as well.
Well, I think it's always funny when you hear AOC talk about truth, when she famously said that she cares far more about being morally right than factually right. This really isn't about truth. This is about winning the political and cultural battle by shutting people down who are going to say something in any way counter to you. And so whether it be podcasts, whether it be news, whether it be written posts, whether it be normal people, their goal is to force those people outside of acceptable life, which is really why they're using the whole Nazi line. They're using Nazis as a synonym of conservatism because everyone understands that the Nazis are the bad guys. They're like the classic bad guy. Most people, like the vast majority of people in the conservative movement, think Nazis are deplorable, white supremacists are deplorable. For example, you and I, the vast majority of people we know, were horrified to see what happened on January 6th, people storming the US Capitol building. And yet AOC can come out, no fact checks from the so-called objective media, by the way, saying that Republicans were celebrating this. It's just appalling to watch, and it's upsetting to see so many good people who just disagree politically be cast as a Nazi.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And you wrote an interesting piece recently at the Daily Wire talking about some of the power shifts that we're seeing when it comes to cable television and cable news. So if you'd like, you can explain some of that, how Fox's viewership is changing especially.
Yeah, so you probably saw Brian Stelter from the hilariously, ironically named Reliable Sources talking about this, how Fox News had a real dip over last week in the ratings. They've been basically top of all the top level mainstream news stations basically since the year 2000. So they've been dominating cable news. And then in last week, they really dipped below CNN and MSNBC. Part of this was actually not because they're losing viewership. This was because CNN, MSNBC gained a huge amount of viewership. So that's actually what I'm most worried about. I'm not particularly worried about Fox News going down the toilet or anything like that. I think it's a really, really important platform that's going to be there for a while. I'm worried that after 4 years of outright lies, that people are still deciding to go to CNN and MSNBC for their news. That should worry a lot of us.
Do you have any inference as to why? Because sometimes I feel like for years and years and years, all of us, we've been really trying to blow the whistle on this, saying the mainstream media it's corrupt. They have an agenda and that's what they're pushing. And sometimes I feel like we all know that the media is corrupt. We all know it lies. And yet there seems to be so many Americans who still somehow, I guess, haven't gotten the memo.
I think it really points to how powerful legacy media is. I mean, you have organizations like the New York Times, which have been around for decades upon decades, CNN, MSNBC, all these organizations have a real generational power. And so if you look at organizations like the Daily Wire, One American News, it's hard to push back because not only we don't have the same resources, like the New York Times had $1 billion in revenue last year or in budget. And so it's really hard to push against some of these people because they have such generational power. You have people growing up with grandparents, parents, and then them looking to the New York Times and CNN for their source of news. And so it's like convincing almost someone of a conspiracy theory that the conspiracy theory is nonsense. It's so deep rooted in their view of what reality is. It's going to be a really hard mission, but we have to keep trying because a lot of their power comes from their grip on reality via the media.
Well, I guess we have our work cut out for us, these next 4 years to keep things on the straight and narrow. But Ian Haworth, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.